At launch, we took a look at the 12600K, and it is a very compelling option for not just only gaming, but also workstation tasks. And if you're happy with this level of multi-threaded performance, it's a really, really great value. I alluded to the fact that on performance, it was more comparable to the 5800X, and since then, that 5800X has seen a pretty huge price drop. So I'll consolidate those benchmarks, let's revisit those, and let's see how that value argument plays out. Welcome to Machines and More. The 5800X launched at $450, and last I checked on a few retailers, $360 is the going price, as low as $330 at Micro Center. Of course, you have to be near one, but yeah, either way you look at it, it's a pretty significant drop. There's a few things at play here. A lot of this has to do with the cadence of Intel and AMD's launches, given that Zen 3 has been around since late 2020, but at least right now, Intel is ahead with Alder Lake. On CPU pricing alone, the 12600K is still priced much more attractively, and the 5800X's pricing had to come down to stay competitive, even though it's still higher than that 12600K, which is around $300 right now. And this is crazy, but Micro Center is selling it for $250. Again, you have to be near one. But the other thing is AMD's mid-cycle refresh with its 3D V-Cache is right around the corner, and of course, the only SKU announced thus far happens to be the 5800X 3D, which is a mouthful, by the way, but the takeaway here is that, at least based on the claims AMD is making, it's going to mostly meet or beat the 12900K at 1080p, which would be nice considering the price that the 12900K comes in at. When we take a quick revisit through the synthetic performance benchmarks, the workstation performance benchmarks, and the gaming performance benchmarks, it is fairly clear that the 12600K is as good, and mostly better, with just a handful of areas where it's behind, and Intel has done really well with this new architecture. But to me, as a reviewer, those two have felt mostly the same when I'm not staring at the numbers. The 5800X is going to run hot when stock, and these temps are okay given AMD's specification though. The 5800X is a single chiplet CPU, and it's really packed dense in there. So past something like a 240 rad, the bottleneck isn't necessarily going to be your heat exchange at the radiator or the heatsink, but rather the heat transfer of the IHS. But realistically, both the 12600K and the 5800X can be cooled adequately with a good single tower air cooler like the Noctua U12A or a 240 AIO. Here's how the value argument breaks down. If we take a look at the same brands from the same manufacturer, overall it's pretty darn close from a total platform cost perspective. For example, for the 5800X, a decent B550 board will do. In the ATX space, you could even get a lower spec X570 board like the MSI Pro series, so throw in a good 16 gig DDR4, 3200 megahertz C16 kit, which is about $70. The spectrum is anywhere from $550 for a lower end board to $640 all in. For Team Blue, one way you might build it is the MSI Z690 at around $230, or you could even opt for the B660 boards that are becoming available now. And there's going to be cheaper ones like the Asus Prime series at $180, so you can theoretically go as low as $560, or you can even go with a higher spec Z690 board such as Gigabytes. And maybe you want to go Z690 given that the 12600K is a K chip, which you could only fully overclock with a Z690 board. And a quick note here is that the B550 boards aren't exactly apples to apples with B660, since B550 doesn't have any limitation for overclocking, unlike the Intel B and H series boards. So for DDR4 ATX, the price difference is small, and I think the board specs are similar enough, and Intel really seems like a good bet here, and the boards seem relatively okay. Some boards have had some I/O issues and XMP issues at launch, but that MSI one actually appears to be quite decent. Mini-ITX is actually where I'm a little bit more concerned, and that's where I think you run into some issues with the value argument because of the boards. You'll note I'm only talking about DDR4 boards, and the primary reason is that DDR5 RAM kits are priced out of contention right now. Not to mention the boards cost more, so if you're building in the next few months, that's unlikely to change. On the AMD side, that's really not much of a problem because in the B550 ITX space, the boards are a little bit more expensive than their ATX equivalents, but they're not that much more, and you might see anywhere from 190 for the ASRock to 220 for the Asus, but at a high level figure 640 to 650 for the platform. But on Team Blue, it's a slippery slope despite a small difference in price there. First off, both Asus and MSI Z690 ITX boards are DDR5 only, so they won't be valid for this comparison, plus they cost an arm and a leg. At least $400 for the Asus, right? Your DDR4 options consist of the 290GB Aorus Z690 i Ultra, which are reviewed, and it's a decently spec board with some serious clearance limitations and buggy firmware, so that puts the platform price on par with the 5800X in either B550 or X570GB flavor at $660, or you have the ASRock Z690 ITX, which this is traditionally a budget line for ASRock, and yeah, it's a pretty pared down board, but everywhere I looked it was priced at least the same as the Aorus, so definitely don't get that one at the same price. B660 was supposed to be that glimmer of hope for a Mini-ITX, but that hasn't turned out the way I hoped either. Asus's board looked to be super promising, but this one is a head scratcher. It's DDR5, which really makes no sense right now. It's going to be a $220 board, but when you see DDR5 RAM kits on Newegg Shuffle, you know something's not quite right in this world. There's a Gigabyte one, and the clearances look a little bit better, but man, it is still one huge enormous I/O shroud, and it only has one M.2 slot, but at least as of right now, it's not available yet. I'm going to guess somewhere around $250 for this comparison, and yeah, I'm a little wary about the BIOS too, given the experience with the Z690 ITX. There is also an ASRock B660M ITX SKU, but yeah, same deal there. Pricing and availability is currently unknown. So all that is to say, for Mini-ITX, until we get some decent boards with some decent cooler clearances, it's going to be very frustrating. And I'm almost to the point where, you know, Alder Lake right now is you're going to have to hold off unless you're willing to stick to liquid cooling and still a possibly buggy board, which is actually a shame because the CPU is absolutely fantastic. And you have the option to go with the iGPU, which is super helpful if you're building with cases that use riser cables, such as like in a vertical GPU build or a sandwich style case, because it's very helpful from a debugging perspective. And you know, these CPUs are a lot of fun to overclock, and at least empirically there's still quite a bit of muscle there, unlike Zen 3, which is pushed pretty hard to the wall. The 5800X does have curve optimizer, and if you can get even a halfway decent chip, you can dial in an undervolt, and if you adjust the PPTs and other specs accordingly, you can then reduce the thermal load on your build quite easily. So yeah, for ATX, Alder Lake is looking like a real winner, but for Mini-ITX, unless MSI comes through with a reasonably priced B660 DDR4 board with good cooler clearance and 2 M.2 slots, I think it's a no-go. But personally, I am perfectly content with the 5800X as is, given the performance difference being so small. Yeah, there's the option for the 5600X, but at least at this point, the pricing is so close, you might as well get the 2 extra cores. And for me, really the choice right now is whether you'll pull the trigger and take advantage of the price drop, or you wait until 5800X 3D comes out, probably at $450, and see if the price drops even more then for the older SKU, or if you want to go for the boosted 1080 performance, since you know, if you play above 1440p, those gains won't likely be meaningful. So really it would be more of a matter of the 5800X's price at that point. But hey, good luck with your builds and decision making. I'm curious what you're going to go for. Feel free to share in the comments down below. Give a like. Links are down below. Thanks for watching.